Okay, welcome to another episode of the Collaboration Podcast. My name is Jonathan Kay, and I am here with my co-host Marco Masi. We are members of the Sri Aurobindo Association of America, an organization that produces the Collaboration Journal. And a little bit about collaboration. It is now in its 50th year of publication and is a journal dedicated to the evolutionary vision of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. Collaboration examines the theory and practice of integral yoga, the place of humankind in the universe, and themes such as consciousness, emergence, and transformation. Articles, essays, poetry, and images explore the human impulse towards perfection and speculate on future possibilities as we move forward in a rapidly changing world. And I would like to welcome our guest today, Lynda Lester. Hi, Lynda. How are you?
Hey there. Hi, Jonathan. Hi, Marco.
Hi, Linda.
Yeah. I'll just read a short bio so we can introduce you to our listeners before we jump into the topics of conversation today. So, Lynda Lester is a past president and a current director of the Sri Aurobindo Association. She edited Collaboration for 10 years, served on its editorial and design teams from 2020 to 2024, and has written numerous articles for the journal. Her most recent article, The Arc of Collaboration, a look at changing times, appeared in the 50th anniversary issue and outlines the history of collaboration. Another article we will mention today is Interstates of Consciousness, Integral Yoga, and the Grateful Dead, a personal journey of how music influenced her yogic path. Also relevant today for today's conversation is a presentation she gave at the 2008 Southwest Pop American Culture Conference called From Sri Aurobindo to the Grateful Dead, Metanormal States and the Geography of Consciousness. Lynda has given many presentations on integral yoga at Om conferences, some of which are available on the SAA YouTube channel, which is where you're watching this podcast. For example, a 6-part multimedia series called Our Many Selves, Moving Toward Mystery of Our Complex, Our Many Selves, Moving Towards Mastery of Our Complex Being. Professionally, Lynda was a writer and editor for 16 years at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado, where she managed print and web publications on high-performance computing. So here we are. We're very excited to have you, Lynda, and I'll turn it over to Marco to kind of start us off.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Linda, for being here. And as usual, to our guests, one of the first questions that I always ask is, well, usually it was how you knew Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. But this time I would would ask another question before that. What kind of life was your life before you even knew about Sri Aurobindo and the Mother? Because this is also something that changed at least my life a lot. And I left somehow my old life, at least mentally, when I discovered them. And there was a break. I don't know if it's the same for everyone. So I'm just asking, what did you do, or tell us something about yourself before you knew Sri Aurobindo and the Mother?
Oh, okay, I'll see what I can do on that. I grew up in Fargo, North Dakota, which is the very geographical center of the United States. It's in the heart of the vast Midwest. And I'll give you the lightning tour of my youth. So I grew up in Fargo. It was kind of like your stereotypical idea of what America looked like in the the 1950s. That was Fargo. Very safe place to grow up. We played outside and we roller skated to school. We, rode our bikes to the swimming pool and spent summers at the lake. Great schools, clean neighborhoods, not much ethnic diversity, except for, when I was about 10, there was this brand new restaurant that came to town, and it served this really weird new thing that was really kind of foreign. It was called pizza. So that was Italian, right? So there's your ethnic diversity in Fargo. They're mostly Scandinavian and Germans there. So that's how I grew up. Then I moved out to Boulder, Colorado in 1968, just in time for what? The hippies, the counterculture. And I participated in those times with great enthusiasm. It was a lot of fun. A lot of fun stuff there. And then I came to Sri Aurobindo. Okay, so that's the quick version of what happened on the outside. Grew up in Fargo, participated in the counterculture, found Sri Aurobindo. But I thought it might be a little more interesting to look at what was happening kind of inside. So I'll start out like when I was a little girl, I believed in fairies. And my world was all about fairies, and I used to pretend that Peter Pan was going to come to my window, which was a little suburban house, in the Midwest. Peter Pan's going to come. And I had this book. It was called The Magic Key. And it was about a boy and a girl who found the key to fairyland. And I read this book, and it was so amazing because they went into fairyland, and there was the queen of the fairies, and she was just all radiant, and there were curtains of bliss and ananda and sparkles and stars. And it was just so wonderful. So something really interesting happened 13 years later when I was with the hippies and doing what we were supposed to do at the time, which was investigating other states of consciousness through the possible use of controlled substances, such as LSD. So on my first trip, I got into this place, and it was full of sparkles and bliss and beauty and ananda. And, what I think it was part of the inner vital, touched by the psychic being, touched by the soul consciousness, and channeling that radiance of divinity. And it was a real place. But what I said was, oh, I know this place. I've been here before. It's fairyland. So that's how I know that way back when I was probably conversant with those inner realms. And one more funny addition to that story is that another 20 years went by, and I started thinking about that book, The Magic Key, and how wonderful it was, and how it just opened to those inner divine levels. So I found a used copy on Amazon, and it was the cheesiest thing I ever saw. The illustrations were like very crude and simple and kind of stereotypical. And it wasn't in the book. It was in the consciousness. So I thought that was kind of interesting. That was one thing. Then there was another thing that happened when I was very little. I was about 8 years old. I was cutting out paper dolls. And all of a sudden, I went like a foot back behind my head, and this awareness opened, and it looked through my eyes. And it said, I will always remember this moment. And it was a pure moment of mental witness consciousness, which we would today call the Purusha, maybe. And I would have that experience periodically through the years, and it was always the same. It's still the same, feels the same today. So that just shows, it gives me the faith that, we are eternal beings here, back here. No matter how old we are, there's something unchanging that's there behind. So that started, like when I was 8. Yeah. So Yeah, moving right along. When I was an early teenager, I was kind of devotional, and I wanted to find God, and I wanted to find Jesus. And I was talking with all my classmates about theology and finding it a little disturbing that according to Christianity, if you didn't believe in Jesus, you were condemned to a lifetime in hell. And I thought that was really odd that, you know, all these wonderful people in foreign lands who'd never heard of the Bible would be, you know, doomed to eternal suffering because they'd never heard of it. So I started doubting. And then the next year when Kennedy was assassinated, I said, well, God could have never permitted that, so there isn't a God. And I became an atheist. And then 2 years later, it got really way worse because I started reading all the existentialists. You know, this is what they were feeding us in the hip high school I went to. Sartre, Camus, Kafka, Ionesco, Beckett. You know, they just got worse and worse. You know, you got people turning into rhinoceroses and beetles and declaiming the absurdity of life and the ridiculous. And I believed it all. So for 5 years, I was just a bitter atheist until when I was 22, my little psychic being, the soul consciousness, started peeping up, peeping through the year. And I didn't know what it was. I started feeling this kind of ache in my heart and this sweetness and this love that would come up. It was not understandable. And I asked my roommate, I said, what do you think this is? And she says, you know, probably a hormone. I go, yeah, probably a hormone. Until 1 month later, when I was listening to some music, it really came forward. And I saw face on. I saw my psychic being, my soul, the true self, the divinity within for the first time. And that changed everything. It just was a sea change. And then that was the end of the atheism as well, because it was obvious that consciousness was, you know, the prime meridian, and divinity was real. So I spent 4 years reading a bunch of books, trying to explain it. And that's when I found Sri Aurobindo. So that's Lynda pre-Sri Aurobindo. There you go.
Yeah, thank you, Lynda. This is very interesting. And I can relate to many things that you say, except one because I'm just a generation that came after the hippies. I mean, I was already there, but I was a 4 years old boy, so I didn't live through these times. And my spontaneous question, according to what you were saying, is, were you attracted by the hippies only because of the psychedelics, use of the psychedelic substances, or what was really the motivation for you at that time? What you believed, not what you know now? Or
Oh,
both?
that's a trick question. You just put a little twist in there.
Yeah.
What I knew then was that, you know, I was never very hip in school. I was kind of a klutz and kind of anxious and not very sure of myself, kind of introverted. And I always kind of felt like an alien. And then when I went out to Colorado, I started meeting all these new friends. And for some reason, they felt like real friends. And I felt at home with them for whatever reason. I didn't know why. It just felt good. Okay. And with what I know now, the analysis I would give it now is because they were exploring deeper consciousness than was normal at the time. And that's where my soul starts to sing. So that's probably what it was.
Yeah, that's what I suspected. Yeah.
Just what you expected.
Quick question, short answer eventually, but how is your position nowadays? Because you know that there's this renaissance of
Oh,
using psychedelics for having spiritual experiences and so on. What are your thoughts about that?
oh, well, at the time, I was very gung ho, and I always said, these are, and the lesser drugs, cannabis and those things too, as well as the psychedelics. And I thought these are great, and I'm never going to say anything against them because they open a whole new reality, and you see that reality is not just what the surface is. That there's so I really okay, but then one night on a trip, the whole field of love broke through. Love, 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 light, light, light. And I got the strong indication, okay, good, you got it, you should quit. Did I quit? No. Should I have quit? Definitely yes, because then after that, I started having really bad experiences, bad trips. So finally, I got the message and I quit. 17 years later, when I was in an incredibly stressful situation and I was physically ill and my nervous envelope was full of holes and someone was really, really angry at me, the field broke open again and all that stuff came through because bad trips, they're not just chemical, they're real realities. The astral dimension is real. And if you don't have the occult skills, of Doctor Strange or a master, there can be real danger. And I had a real difficult time trying to seal up the seam again. And it was the worst thing I ever went through in my life. So in that time, I changed my mind. And I can't go near drugs anymore. And I also am very cautious. I would say to people, be very, very cautious because if you're an empath, if you're open to those inner realms, and if you're not quite formed and you don't have those occult skills, there could be some real danger.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. Yeah, very interesting.
Well, maybe we could turn to the main, I guess the main reason why we invited you on was to discuss your most recent article in the collaboration journal. Um, let, let's see. I was trying to remember the edition name so people could. Do you have it with you? Does anybody could we show? We showed the image at the beginning of the podcast, but
It's not out yet. So.
well, the one on music and consciousness, summer
Oh,
2024.
oh, I'm sorry.
Yes,
Oh,
yes. So let's just focus in on that for a second.
oh my
Um,
goodness. Okay.
because you
Yeah.
had an article, Interstates of Consciousness, Integral Yoga,
Mm,
and the Grateful Dead. And
okay.
it seems as though we could maybe bridge our discussion to how music kind of functioned as this
Ah,
liminal experience for
ah,
you.
right.
Um, you found, you just described the context, the cultural context that you were in, and then kind of how you were able to kind of slowly through having experiences, and then through, also the milieu, the people you found yourself surrounded with, especially when you moved to kind of maybe find yourself more in Colorado, and you kind of were able to find the outside of those kind of structures that you inherited, that you grew up into. And music, I think, has always been a very formative and important part of your life, but especially when you started experiencing the music of the Grateful Dead. So I was wondering if you could give a little bit of a broader context to the music of the Grateful Dead, your experience with their music, and then maybe just expand a little bit on your article, which is a beautiful it's just a beautiful piece of writing and sharing your own inner experiences and how it relates to the larger context of transformation and the yoga.
Oh my goodness. Well, let me see. So first of all, I want to offer a disclaimer again about, there's a huge stereotype about the Grateful Dead and drugs. And everybody assumes that everybody listening to the Grateful Dead is stoned out of their minds. But due to my unfortunate experiences with bad trips, I quit all that before I got into the Grateful Dead. So all my most of my experiences after the first year or two with the Grateful Dead were absolutely straight. So they're real experiences in consciousness, not chemically enhanced. So I want to make that clear. And the Grateful Dead were instrumental in that experience that I just mentioned, where my psychic being came forth fully for the first time, because the context in which that happened was I was listening to a song by the Grateful Dead called Dark Star. And Dark Star is their most mystical piece. And, it lasts anywhere from 5 minutes to 40 minutes. And so I was listening to it on a record, and I started listening, and it got more and more complex, and I went deeper and deeper, and I started hearing behind the notes, and it raised this cathedral of truth and beauty. And all of a sudden, I went so deep that I saw my inmost being, the true divinity within. But the interesting thing is, it was Dark Star. It was the same thing as the music. It was knowledge by identity with the music. So the music and me were one, and it was my soul. So it's an experience of the soul universalizing out and becoming one with everything. So it was this amazing experience. And, this was at a time when I'd been a rabid atheist for 5 years, and I thought all forms of religion were, idiocy. Religion was the opiate of the masses, and it was stupid. And all of a sudden, here's this experience, and I just couldn't believe it. And so I went around trailing the glory of that experience for a couple of weeks. And then one day I'm walking across campus, and something happens. This force in me starts swelling up into this love with divinity and psychic presence, and it gets bigger and bigger, and it goes out, and it encompasses the quad and all the buildings, and it gets bigger and bigger until it's as big as the world. And I'm looking at it, and I'm going, what is this? It's a psychedelic experience. But I hadn't done any psychedelics. And I thought, is this the spiritual energy that all the hippies are talking about? Is this the numinous oneness that mystics are talking about? And then, I had this horrible thought. Is this God? Oh, oops. Yeah, it was. And so in that moment, that was the end of atheism and, priestly scientific dogmas, and the end of the materialist paradigm. And the Grateful Dead kind of were the ones that kicked it all off. And so ever after, I'd always go to the Grateful Dead to restart that experience, because their music somehow, it's just tuned in to this deeper reality. It's got a tropism towards light and love and illumination. And when you listen to it, it awakens. And the reason why does it do that, you may ask? I hear you ask. Because the center of the Grateful Dead, not the leader, but the center, the soul center, was Jerry Garcia. And he had an incredibly developed emotional being with what I think is a psychic presence behind. And it just beamed out love through the guitar, through the notes, and out, and all the other people in the band, they were totally tuned into it. They were all in this group mind of oneness, and they were all different parts of this one being. And let's see. So it was, you'd be listening, and it would be like playing your heart. It would be playing the secret music of your heart, and you would know it. So always, ever after that, I would listen to the Grateful Dead and get much practice in that consciousness, because it takes a lot of practice. You have the experience and then it falls down, so you have to do it over and over again. So that's the specifics of the Grateful Dead. And if you want to widen it out to music in general, which of course you must do, because these skills, you know, they were unique to my personality, and they're unique to the so-called deadheads who all get it, because somehow there's this soul family of people that all resonate. They've got DNA that's tuned into the Grateful Dead. But if you go outside that group, this is a transferable skill. Once you learn how to go into the inner consciousness, you can go in when you're listening to classical music. You can go in when you're listening to ragtime music. You can go in when you're in the car driving and you hear the talking heads, you know, or you hear this cheesy song, Red Roses for a Blue Lady, you know, this schmaltzy song from the 60s. You can learn how to do it. Because, you know, widening it out again, Mother says that the role of music is in helping the consciousness to uplift itself to the spiritual heights. And Sri Aurobindo says that the psychic being, which is our soul, you know, the divinity within, expresses best where? Through the emotional vital. And the vital, you know, that's the part of our being that is the life energy, the movement, the action, you know, the creativity, the will. And the higher vital is the emotional being, and it's right here, right in front. The psychic being is behind the heart, and the emotional vital is right in front of the heart. And the psychic being expresses most easily through the higher vital. We also know that music comes through the higher vital. So you can like do a reverse track there, and you can go from the emotional vital music. If you listen very deeply with extremely focused attention, you can hop on to the melody and the counterpoint and the guitar lines and the chords and the layers and the patterns, and they will take you through the inner emotional being, into the inner being, and into the psychic being. And from there, the consciousness can widen out and get higher, deeper, and it starts universalizing, because the psychic is one with everything. And you get this, you know, wonderful experience through music. So again, that's kind of a knowledge by identity experience with music. So basically, music can be a really good hands-on tool for practice in developing the inner and the higher consciousness. That's what I'd say. And I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, I like this very much. But after all, quick question from someone who is ignorant, because you both are experts in the musical field. So maybe it's also a question for you, Jonathan, in a sense. But what is, from the spiritual point of view, what is music for you, or at least? It's something that helps us to connect with a high, because this is a question that is also motivated by something that Sri Aurobindo once said, that someone asked him, is music on every level on every plane of existence? And he said, it is until the overmental, while in the supramental there is no music. It left me a bit, yeah, in a strange, I found this strange, because after all, I say, music is something harmonious that should make part of the spiritual life. It should be also at the supramental level. And therefore, the question is, after all, what is music? At least intuitively, for you.
I'd like to see that quote, because I never saw that quote. So if you want to send me that quote.
Okay, we'll take a look. We'll search for this, yeah.
You know, so, you know, Sri Aurobindo he says everything, everywhere, all the time. So you can hear this from Sri Aurobindo, but you can also hear that. He also says that music, that the arts, and he includes music, he expressly includes music in the arts, bring body, heart, and mind into touch with the spirit. Okay, so that's one thing. And then, you've got this multiple manifestation with the different levels of being: physical, vital, emotional, mental, and so forth. And each level has a divine expression. So I think probably for me, music is a divine expression in the vital and the higher vital nature, meant for the expression of divine beauty and divine delight. Like you just go into a chapter, canto in Savitri, like the Godheads of the greater being, and it talks about how wonderful and beautiful it is in those realms of the inner vital, which right now they're not manifested, but in the coming life, divine life on earth, they will be manifested. And I think music will be this glorious way to have that experience in the heart and in the body and in the mind of this, delight of being. Just off the top of my head. And there might be something in there about harmony, and maybe Jonathan could say something about that. I don't know, because he's the musician.
Beautiful. These are beautiful thoughts. And I mean, I think I would just add to the conversation that there seems to be something in the structure of some kinds of music that can not only take us into like an inner being or a different sense of ourselves, or help us kind of find an outside to ourselves in a way, find a way in which we are being compelled to transform into something that we are currently not. But I think there's something about how the structure of that music, that could also be the structure of the soul in a way. There's something about the psychic being that we have to be thinking about structures, that it's something that is in
Oh,
time, that is in becoming, that is part of what we inherit. Now, when we get to the Atman, and the idea of, definitely, it's something that is permanent and out, and you could say, self-identical, something that is eternally present. But the question of the psychic being is an interesting one, and when I try to think about how each of us have a different formation that is calling us to come into relation with it, it's amazing how some of the creative art forms, or just some kind of the immensity of a certain situation, whether it being in nature or being at a concert, or picking up an instrument or whatnot, it kind of it creates a resonance between that structure that's kind of calling forth, that's kind of compelling us into doing this act, into being try to be equal to this immensity, this kind of sublime moment. So I think there's something really interesting, especially when certain people have this attraction, this kind of, and then they can normalize it. Like, you use the word,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
meta normal. Like, it's kind of like this something that it's supranormal in a way, yet through practice, through, you use the word apprenticeship in your article, through this kind of mystical or sublime apprenticeship, it kind of can become more and more um, um, more and more normalized, in the sense that it's accessible to you. And I think there's something about different musics containing different types of ways in which they deploy these spiritual, these psychic and relational structures that are kind of deployed in music, in the architecture of sound, if you will. If you were to look at how sound and music practices are very much, they are developed upon specific kinds of relational structures and whatnot. So, for instance, for me, it's let's say the music of John Coltrane. In my own journey, there was something about my own the way in which my upbringing, and then what I would inherit, and the way in which the forces of that music really opened me and I think started resonating with something that was already calling forth in my own being, you know. So that's kind of just some thoughts off the top of my head about these structures, and in the music of the Grateful Dead, you know, you described their music in a very broad and sense very beautifully, but it's coming from all these, it's kind of like trans genre. It's beyond a certain kind of genre. It's improvisational. There's different ways in which they're engaging with each other, from being very in a certain tradition to jumping traditions to being
Right,
very
right, right.
open to like to like what is not yet possible in terms of like the experimental, the improvisational. And I think there's something about how they were able to engage the audience in this big adventure, you know, like, you know, it's an adventure of musical consciousness in a way. And it's a beautiful thing. But that's just some thoughts. Where shall we
Yeah,
go from here?
and collective too, because the audience was part of the band. You know, it's very much collaborative, communal type effort. I just wanted to go back. You know, you mentioned the Atman, and you know, going back to my personal experience. In 1973, I went to a couple of, and this is right after the mother left the body, right? So she just left the body, and in my mind, she like distributed, she universalized into the atmosphere like an aerosol, okay? Supramental aerosol. So right after that happened, I went to 2 Grateful Dead concerts. Uh-oh. And right in the middle of one of the concerts, one of the shows, during this particular song, I went shooting up out of the top of my head, up to this place. And now I know it was the Atman. It was the self, the silent self, where everything was absolute silence, absolute peace. You know, it's just, you know, in the middle of this ear-splitting rock and roll concert. So that was pretty interesting. And then afterwards, for like 4 weeks, so, you know, when you go up like that, your psychic being is connected in a column going up to the central being and up to the universal self. So what happened is the column started working up and down, and my psychic being just started responding to that light that I saw. It was going up and down the column. And I went around for 4 weeks in this kind of champagne intoxication, where the inner planes were way more real than anything in my outer life. And that's when I decided I really needed a guru. And I sat down in my chair for 3 hours, and I called to the divine, and I said, I need my guru. Please send, call now, please send guru. And sure enough, you know, 3 months later into my life came Sri Aurobindo. So these things can all connect in such a way. And I really like what you said about all those different things, Jonathan. Very well articulated, beautifully expressed.
Yeah, so we skipped this question because, well, it's okay, because we don't need to follow a precise order. But as I said, I'm curious about how did you find Sri Aurobindo? Yeah, if you wish, the outer and inner conditions and events that led you to discover him, and then also the mother, of course.
Okay, yeah. So let's go back to that first experience when I saw my psychic being for the first time listening to Dark Star by the Grateful Dead. So after that, I think I might have mentioned I started reading all these books that were available at the time: Buddhism, Hinduism, the Gita, Ram Dass, Be Here Now, Rajneesh, you know, Krishnamurti, all the gurus. And then when I had that experience of going out up the top of my head into the Atman in those 4 weeks of psychic champagne and bliss, and when I decided that I needed to find the secret of what this was all about, and I started calling for my guru, Outer life had no meaning anymore. I couldn't go to parties. Nothing was fun, you know, and I just kind of sat around meditating for 3 hours a day. And I said, you know, this can't go on. I have to find out what this is all about. So I quit my job. And there was a friend of mine from college who said, you know, we're working on this New Age festival. It's going to be great. And we're going to bring all these spiritual people to town. Do you want to help? So I said, okay. And it turned into this monstrous thing. We invited all the gurus of the era, you know, Swami Satchidananda and Yogi Bhajan. And, you know, we had a Buddhist and we had a shaman and a Native American medicine man and a Tibetan monk and, you know, quantum physicists and, you know, self-help, all coming together in this symposium to talk about truth and the meaning of life. But we also invited all the rock and roll bands. It was kind of like a mini Woodstock. We had all these bands, and we had an arts and crafts fair, you know, with all these booths with hippies selling stuff, and we had food concessions. It was just massive, and it took place, and we had a parade and a kids parade and environmental exhibits all throughout town. You know, maybe 5,000 people came to town. Just the crowds were streaming in, you know, in hippie vans and, you know, lots of people. So I'm sitting there on the first day of the conference and I'm at registration. So this guy comes bounding up the stairs and he's got a beetle haircut, a black mop top of hair. He's very good looking, handsome guy. He's got this, and this may be a mythological memory, but in my memory, he's got a purple buccaneer shirt with puffy sleeves. And he's got a guitar slung on his back, and he comes bounding up the stairs, and he says, "You know, I'm the driver. I drove one of your speakers to the conference in this 24-foot Winnebago. Where should I park it?" And I said, "Well, you can park it in the parking lot of my house," because I was living with the people who were organizing the conference. So he parked it there. And, you know, I'd see him on and off during the conference. And the last day of the festival, he says, "You know, you should go to this one talk tonight by one of the speakers, whose name was Dr. Madhusudan Reddy." And you may recognize the name. Dr. Madhusudan Reddy was the father of Ananda Reddy, who is currently one of the pundits over at the Sri Aurobindo Ashram. So this guy, he's saying, "You got to go to this talk. You got to go." And I go, "I don't want to go to the talk. I want to listen to the rock and roll band." "No, you got to go." Okay. So I went to the talk, and holy moly, I don't know what the guy said, but 1 hour later, wham, it was just like that, you know, like being struck by lightning. It's like the talk ended and I went, oh my gosh, I am committed to Sri Aurobindo forever. This is the path of my life. This is what's going to happen. And the only place I want to be now is in Pondicherry. And 4 months later, so the conference ends and I'm so disappointed because in my mind, what this festival was going to do was bring a descent of light and illumination and love. It was going to spread out and transform the whole field of action. And that didn't happen. It was just like a big party, you know? It's like a big party. Like, come on. And I was like really ticked off. And I was fried because I'd been working on it for 4 months. And I said, okay, that's it. I got to get out of Dodge. I'm going to leave town with this guy who drove Madhusudan Reddy to the conference. And the guy's name was Madas. He got his name from the mother of the Sri Aurobindo Ashram. Madas means servant of mother. He also was a practitioner of integral yoga. Okay, so I ran away from Boulder with this guy Madas. And I want to tell you, he was a bad boy. He was a black sheep yogi. You know, he was just a real hustler, but he was like full. Oh, he had such a vital. He was full of energy and vitality. He was funny and he was fun, and he was crazy and outrageous. So we started out in Fargo, got a couple of other people, and we formed this little spiritual community. And we bought this 48-foot mobile home, 8 feet wide, which meant that you could pull it on the highway. And what did we pull it with? A pickup truck. And let me tell you, friends, you should not pull a 48-foot mobile home behind a pickup truck. Plus, it was filled with stuff, like a piano. Modest never did anything halfway. We had a piano. We had a ping pong table, fold-up ping pong table in the mobile home. We had 500 books in bed, and it started fishtailing, and they almost flipped it in the river. And but they were okay. So we migrated from Fargo to Oklahoma City to Phoenix to Los Angeles, and later we went up to San Francisco, and then down to Sedona and back to Santa Monica. And for a while in LA, we were living just in this little 14-foot trailer. And we'd park it on the street curb and get busted by the police at 3 a.m. And we'd live under, freeway bridges, park it on the beach. But what we were doing 24/7 was we were studying Sri Aurobindo, 24/7. Like we'd walk up and down the golf course fairways reading Synthesis of Yoga out loud. And we'd record Savitri 8-track tapes. Remember? No, you guys don't remember 8-track tapes. And they'd run all night long and get it into our subconscious. And we tried to bring the consciousness into the physical. So we took Aikido, and we went disco roller skating, and we went surfing, and we took gymnastics and ballet. And, it was like this boot camp integral yoga. And there was a lot of psychological abuse, he's a vital guy, and there's, the vital misbehaves. But it was a real grounding in integral yoga, for which I'll always be grateful. So that's how I came to Sri Aurobindo the Mother. That was my first apprenticeship with integral yoga.
Yeah, fascinating story. I think there could be a lot to tell. I imagine for hours. But I'm wondering now, okay, so you were there, but then there was also a second season, so to speak, in Pondicherry, no? Right?
Oh, yeah. That was brief. Okay, so
Okay.
I got there in October 1974. And what happened in November 17th, 1974? That was a year after the mother left the body. And they opened the mother's room to the visitors. So we went through the mother's room 1 year after she left the body. And you might want to know what happened. But unfortunately, I don't remember. Because when I went into the room, everything got so bright. It was like I was blinded by this light, and I couldn't see. Everything got really hazy, and something happened. And when I left the room, I came back into my normal consciousness, and I absolutely could not remember what happened. And what I think happened is I probably went into samadhi, which, by all accounts, you never remember what happens. So her presence was so strong. So we were there for 11 weeks, and I have a rather weak physical, vital constitution. And it was so overwhelming to be in India in that different culture, and to be with Manas, which was just, outrageously intense, that I got sick. I collapsed. I started, my physical broke down, and I started reeling and bumping into things. I got so weak. I could hardly stand. And so I checked into the nursing home, which is like a little clinic, for 8 weeks. And all I did for 8 weeks, this is what I did when I went to Pondicherry. I spent 8 weeks on my cot reading Sri Aurobindo, reading Life Divine, reading the Mother, and learning about the infrastructures of consciousness. And they couldn't find anything wrong with me. It was not parasites. It wasn't, dysentery or malaria. It wasn't anything. It was, I think it was an inner reaction, and it put me into a kind of a weak state of chronic fatigue, which then lasted for the rest of my life. Uh-oh. So I've had to deal with that for a long time. But anyway, 11 weeks in Pondicherry, that's all. And then we came back and started our little adventures. But I did make it to Pondicherry. And I went to the Samadhi. And when I went to the Samadhi, the most amazing thing happened. I sat down and all of a sudden everything got quiet. I couldn't think. My mind was absolutely still. And, all the anxiety was gone and the troubles were gone and the stress was gone. And there was only peace beyond understanding. Ego was gone. And I said, oh, this is nirvana. This is mukti. This is liberation. I've attained nirvana. I'm thinking in the way, and it was very strong. And nirvana lasted until I walked out and entered the street again, when all the thoughts and all the things came back. So that was the power of the Samadhi, which is, you may know that's the tomb where Sri Aurobindo and Mother are entombed. So that's the force of the Samadhi. So that was another interesting experience I had in Pandi.
Yeah, these are really, really fascinating, and I think really is bringing out how this. I love this idea of this apprenticeship, and I think that your article, you present journal entries of these experiences.
Oh,
Yeah, with your experiences with the Grateful Dead, and I'm just using this as an example. I was wondering if you could share some other ways in which you've engaged with this as a kind of an unfolding apprenticeship, which is really it's uniquely yours, but it's also grounded in this larger metaphysics, these kind of like you also use the word the geography of the planes and the parts, or you could say a spiritual cartography in a way. I think you use the word cartography at a different place, but they're very, very good. I think it's a good terms to really get into the fact that this is a kind of, how can we equal this apprenticeship and then really be able to generate momentum and progress, right? Because but knowing that this is your own journey, but you're in it, not in it alone. But it is unique in the sense of like when Sri Aurobindo says there's as many yogas as there are, or integral yogas as there are people. It's really beautifully articulating that everybody is a unique singularity, yet we have to be able to identify aspects that we share. And this comes to like, being able to engage with not only the histories that we inherit and the forces that our cultures are carrying forward that don't necessarily serve us, finding ways to like overcome that or subvert that, like you're talking about through the hippie counterculture and through music, which was really aimed at doing that. But then coming out of that and building communities and whatnot based on shared aspirations and shared goals. And I just think that maybe if you could just, the first part of the question was how you continue to cultivate this apprenticeship. Maybe, like journaling would be one way that you expressed in your article. And then the second part of the question, which SAA and the in our organization, we're very much we're dwelling on, meditating on, working on, and also concerned with the status of how do we build these aspirational communities.
yeah. Well, those are two giant, giant, giant questions. So let me tackle the first one first. Good idea. First one first. So how did I develop that? So the Grateful Dead were one of my main ways that I learned to go into the inner and the higher consciousness. So, you know, there's different classical approaches to integral yoga. The three main approaches being jnana yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, which is, you know, the yoga of knowledge, and, you know, that's usually associated with meditation. Bhakti yoga, which is the yoga of the heart, and karma yoga, which is the yoga of action. So I've always been most inclined to meditation, and that is where I am an intrepid traveler of the inner realms. I just love that. And I love, you know, exploring those inner continents. And I think it's just amazing. And so I've done that through listening to the Grateful Dead, but I've done that through meditation as well. And it's like the whole world starts to open up, and it's just so much fun. And the more you do it, the better you get. So, and of course, since I'm a writer, that's what I do for a living. I wrote it all down, and that's why I have all those journal entries for the Grateful Dead. And because I'm really interested in knowledge, and because all my integral yoga friends were telling me, oh, Grateful Dead, bad, you know, they, you know, desires, darkenings, afflictions, you know, here there be dragons, you know, don't do it, it's bad, it's bad. I wanted to say, no, it's not, it's really good. So I was like trying to learn what Sri Aurobindo and the Mother said about the planes and parts of being and unite them. So that's what I tried to do in the article, to prove that, no, I wasn't just, you know, making this stuff up. But it, you know, you could translate these things into what Sri Aurobindo talked about in the cartography of consciousness. So meditation, that's been my big thing. But you can't skip any stages. And there's one stage that the Mother talks about in integral yoga, and it's the very first stage. And it's, you need to learn the parts of your being. You need to have them become conscious, and then you need to purify them. So that's been the other thing that I've been learning about slowly through all the years, is the difference between the mental, the vital, and the physical. So the mental, I used to think, oh, I've read most of Sri Aurobindo's, I've read the major works of Sri Aurobindo many times. You know, I think I've read Synthesis maybe 9 or 10 times now, Life Divine at least 3 times, Savitri several times. So I read these all the time. And I used to think, you know, in Letters on Yoga, all the volumes, the Upanishads, the Gita, you know, I've read them all. I love it. I just love it, because that's that yoga of knowledge. And I used to think in my first 6 years, okay, I understand Sri Aurobindo. I get what he's saying. I totally get it, because I did. You know, I got it in the mind. Oh dear, little girl. Mental realization is not spiritual realization. And the mind sees all these things, and then you got the vital to deal with. So I started out up here in the mind, and then I went down into the vital and started learning about all the revolts and the catastrophes and the disasters that can happen in the vital being. And I learned that really well. And right now, for the last 5 years, I'm down in the physical. And the physical, it's even in my estimation, it's even a harder obstacle than the vital. The vital is, you know, like really revolting and really, you know, drama and extremes. But the physical is inertia and stubbornness. And it just says, I can't do it. It's too hard. So I've been learning about these different parts of being. So I've got them, and I see that there's different parts, and they all go at different speeds. So now the thing to do is, you need to connect, baby. You need to connect those inner realms with these outer realms. And it's not so hard to bring the light into the mind, but it's much harder. My vital, except for my emotional vital, my mid-vital, it's not very strong. It's kind of weak. And my lower vital is just very small and mean and kind of cramped and pitiful and, you know, dull. So it's really hard to bring that light into those and into the physical. It's like, oh my gosh. So that is the continuing apprenticeship. And, you know, when I first started integral yoga, perhaps like many of us, we thought, oh, good, I see, you know, supermental transformation pretty soon, you know, yeah, I'm going to do it, you know, few years, maybe 12, you know, or maybe it'll take a whole lifetime, but I'm going to get there. And now you see, when you see all the subparts and the subparts and the subparts of all these different, you know, levels of being, you see it's this huge work. And there's many a slip between cup and lip. So that's kind of what I'm working on now, is bringing all these wonderful things that I know about in the inner into the outer. And that's the whole classical spiritual problem, after all. And that's the difference between integral yoga and the traditional spiritualities. You know, you go in, that's it, you're done, you know, you're free. And, you know, you just pop off into the next reincarnation. But Sri Aurobindo demands the transformation, which is just a terrific work.
Beautiful.
So,
And I could just quickly just respond by saying these, like what you're speaking about seems to me as the whole, you know, mystery of creativity, and how we kind of have these internal visions or experiences. But the question is, how do we then find the tools, the technology, the techniques to externalize them? And then the larger question is, with who am I going to share this and
yeah,
build a
right.
world with? And so this idea of like this cartography, this idea of like finding the tools and techniques, and really like working in a subjective scientific sense, like in terms of a yogic sense, with these different planes and parts, and trying to find the dynamics of them. How do they, how can I, you know, turn within to experience the subtle nature of them, but then how do they actually take form and structure in terms of how I am in the world, and then how can I build communities that can help amplify these aspirations, and really kind of strengthen the kind of the kind of directions and the kind of culture that they can build. So I just respond in that way. It's really great conversation. Marco, do you have anything that you want to add at this
That's
point? I mean, we're coming
exactly,
to.
I was just going to say that. Marco, let's hear from you. Do you have any observations on this? Ba-bum, we were on the same wavelength, Jonathan.
No, I have perhaps a different perception, because I come from a very different background. You are have a more this musical understanding. I'm coming from a more scientific point of view, where I have also a difficulty to detach from a purely speculative and mental and philosophical understanding of these things to a direct experiential dimension. My difficulty is also yours, Linda, where I'm working a lot in the physical. Yeah? And my physical is in a constant state of burnout, so to speak.
Oh, yeah, shoot.
And I'm the opposite of that kind of vitality that you were talking about, of that guy. That
Oh, yeah. Right.
I have this difficulty to find the equilibrium of having this mental silence that allows to get to the surface all the deeper dimensions. Yeah, I'm still struggling on this, and it comes also due to the fact that I have a background where I stressed me out in the last 10, no, not only 10, I would say 30 years. Yeah? Because I was still in this mentality, I have to do. Huh? And that stresses you out, and then you're left with no vitality at all. So I have a different perspective where I see these planes. When you talk about the vital, the psychic, they are all covered by a physical layer on which I have to work now in this moment. So, but this is, well, it's more complicated than that. But let me come back to a thing that you were talking about, because when you said, "Oh, we thought that we were just there at the supramental, and it is just a matter of few years perhaps," and this didn't turn out to be true. Yeah, and if I may read a part here of your article here on that you entitled the Arc of Collaboration, where you say,
Wait, so that's the next issue. That's the one that followed the music issue. So that
yeah. But because you were talking about that a bit, well, I could articulate this in two questions. One is the role that played in your life collaboration, journal, because you are you have quite a long history here, I see. I didn't know about that. And then the second about is, how do you see it today? And how did your vision shift from what you wrote here? You say, today, decades later, fewer people remain who knew the mother in person. Aspirants who in the 1980s thought they might be supramentally transformed are seeing that they would underestimate the scope of the undertaking, which is infinitely more detailed and multidimensional than they would first suppose. And then later you say, and you connect this. I found this very interesting, fascinating, because you have a grand vision of this, where you say, then today you will come to the techno-optimism that had been almost universally felt by the emerging online culture and that has changed to a darker pessimism. Constant feed and network connectivity are not bringing human unity, but human disunity, polarization, political violence, and the collapse of societal consensus. And then you connect to the internet and the social media and so on. I'm curious to understand, how did this shift? So you shifted from a sort of optimism, spiritual optimism, to a darker pessimism. Is it right?
Not exactly. It's not really pessimism. I wouldn't say pessimism. I would call it discrimination. You know, I told, as far as I'm concerned, everything that Sri Aurobindo says about the coming supramental manifestation, it's right on, and that's where we're going. And everything that he says about integral yoga, this is how you do it, and this is how you develop overhead capabilities, and then you bring the light down, right on. Not one thing has changed there. And, once you're connected with the soul and the psychic being, you're happy forever, and you're in that happy place, and it's eternal. And, you'll never be ground down to nihilistic rejection. Again, what's changed is, when you have project management, you have the triangle, and it's like scope, budget, and time, and you have to have all those things in balance to get the project out the door. So what this is scope. When you first start the yoga, you have no idea of the scope. It's way, way, way more complicated than you think. So, and that happened at the ashram too. Yeah. Everybody in the 1930s and the 40s, they thought they were going to live forever, and then they didn't. And so, every generation has to discover this on their own. So it's the baby boomer generation that discovered that. But, it's like, when you start integral yoga, you look at it and you say, okay, transform physical, vital, mental. It's like you got this little box of silverware, forks and knives and spoons, and they're all mixed up. And you go, okay, you just put them in the different piles. It's okay, I got the box. It's not a box. It's a frickin' Amazon warehouse that covers 5 city blocks with, 8 trillion, shelves. That's the scope of the work. So it's just bigger than we thought. And the other thing is that, this evolution, it happens. How does this evolution from mind to supermind occur? It occurs through a vast yoga of nature, which is just like individual yoga. It's the same thing, but way more messy, way more complicated, way more confusing. And it's just like in individual yoga where you have to organize these different parts of your being. So right now what we're seeing around us is vast groups of humanity that are manifesting these different resistances and revolts. You got mental deterioration, people that are losing rational capability and becoming subrational, and they're, conspiracy theories and, fake news and all that. You've got a loss of mental capability, which is the mental inability to go forward. And you've got vital revolts, which are, the vital likes to amass. It wants to, it goes around rampaging, for its own desires and accumulating and, causing disaster everywhere, greed, money. You've got vast groups of people that are in that. And then you've got the physical resistance, which is tradition and the unwillingness to change. So you've got all this going on, which is a big mess, And if that was all, it would sort of like be business as usual, because that's how yoga works. But right now, we've got an extra added contingent because we've got a bunch of asuras, which are another name for hostile forces, nasty dark energies that are camping on to all those resistances, normal resistances of nature, and exaggerating them and making the revolts even worse. And, it's a very dark energy, a lot of falsehood. And, if we want to look at it on the optimistic side, Sri Aurobindo says that often happens when there's about to be a tremendous breakthrough of a higher plane of consciousness. So, that could be why it's getting so critical now. But still, it's, Sri Aurobindo also said, Sri Aurobindo says everything everywhere. You can look at this one place where he says yoga is not safe, and it's not guaranteed. It takes effort, it takes choice, it takes work, it takes development and commitment. So it's really a race between light and darkness. And personally, there's, a huge danger to the world today because we've got 8 billion people and we're exceeding planetary capacities. And, you've got all these extinction level threats, World War II level type threats that we're facing. And, we all know what those are, there's a whole list. So there's that. But again, going back to especially Mother's work in Agenda, when you look at all this and you could just crumple into a ball of despair, and, it's terrifying. And, it looks so bad, but you have to be careful of this fear, because fear is a very unique and precious characteristic of the physical mind. And the physical material mind is the part of the mind that only sees physical material things. What you see is what you get. And it doesn't believe in the divine, finds it very difficult to feel these inner planes, doesn't trust in it, and it always foresees catastrophe. And, I've got a lot of experience with this, with my physical. I have a very incorrigible physical mind, and it's always saying, the they're all reading, they're all going, wah, 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 you know, it's like danger, doom, catastrophe, you're going down, this is bad, it's very bad, you know, but maybe it's not. Sri Aurobindo says you can't lament too much what's going on the surface unless you know what's happening underneath. And what's happening underneath, we know that it's evolution. And so, you know, the thing to do is back up, retain your equanimity, do your yoga, and try to, you know, have the best consciousness that you have, because consciousness is contagious. Bad consciousness is contagious, but so is good consciousness. So if you have if you make an amazing change in your own individual being, it can propagate out, because everything is connected, you know, through underground rivers. You know, it's like a TikTok challenge. Have you seen those? You know, it's like somebody will put out this silly little thing, you know, like put an ice bucket on your head, and then all of a sudden goes viral and everybody's doing that. So consciousness can work like that and go out. So, you know, that's just a vote for doing the best we can at the individual level. And Mother says, you know, a focused, intense aspiration can change the outer circumstances. And, you know, Sri Aurobindo says all can be done if the God touch is there. And, you know, don't underestimate the possibility of miracles, you know. They can happen in an instant, you know, hour of God, Sri Aurobindo talks about, you know, like just recently, look at what happened to Assad, you know, that the fall of Assad in Syria, you know, just overnight. It's like, wow. So, you know, lots happening.
Yeah,
there you
from
go.
that perspective, it's like how are we building ourselves? How is sadhana preparing ourselves to be equal to the event, the moment when these kind of cosmic forces can descend
Right.
or come, and you know, transformation happens in quantum leaps, and this is where I think, you know, Marco, your work in consciousness studies is so
Yeah.
valuable, because you are bringing in and we'll definitely have to have a podcast that we focus in on your work, because it's very important work in this regard of bringing in the, you know, Sri Aurobindo and the metaphysical aspects to consciousness studies in general, which I think is very important. But anyway, we've been talking for over an hour now. So how do we feel? Is there anything else that we need to discuss or talk about? Anything else that's coming up for either one of you?
Yeah, I'd like to answer your part 2 question, Jonathan, which is how
Okay.
can we find others to do this work? So this is one thing that the Sri Aurobindo Association is working on. And we've got, as the excuse, we've got a project, and that project is Collaboration Journal. So we put out a call for volunteers to help with the journal, because in the old days, Collaboration was a one-person enterprise. There were 4 different editors, and each issue was put out basically by one person. So in the revised collab is what we affectionately call Collaboration, we wanted to be a group, collective team effort. And so we got a bunch of people working on different aspects of collaboration, and they meet in different groups. You got an editor's group, a designer group, an art group, a subscription group, a web group, digital media group. And when we have these meetings, we say that half of our work is the product. It's the external product, but the other half is the internal work in consciousness. And we're explicitly trying to do that inner work in consciousness together. We're trying, as we meet, as we make these business decisions, as we decide, do we like this layout or that layout? You know, should we use this designer or that? We're trying to go into this inner consciousness as we do it, and to, you know, hold down the vital when it wants to jump in, and to sink into the psychic being, and to call the divine into the action. And it's really hard. But the wonderful thing is that in each of these groups, you got 3 or 4 or 5 other people that are all trying to do it. They're all speaking the same language, and it's a miracle. It's a miracle because you're never going to be able to talk about supermental evolution at the office water cooler, you know? So it's a blessing. And these people come together, they're drawn together to do this work. So that's at least what we're trying to do. And that's one way that we're trying to address that.
Yeah. Thanks, Linda. Beautiful. Well
Thank
said.
you. Thank you, Linda. Yeah, very inspiring rendering of not so much your life, but your inner life and your visions and your perception, your feelings on how, yeah, also spirituality plays out in the outer world and in the doing. Yeah, great. So it's never boring to listen to you. It's always an interesting perspective. It's very different from the usual perspective. So, but I see now that we have gone upon beyond the 1 hour and a half. Maybe we should wrap it up, and come to a conclusion. Jonathan, you.
Absolutely. Well, why don't you just say something very quickly about the upcoming article? Because we've talked about your article in Music and Consciousness, but the 50th anniversary article, which is hopefully hitting the press as this is released. But
Yeah, in that article, and you can read it, we don't have to go into it now, but it
No.
basically talks about the history of Collaboration Journal from when it started as a 4-page newsletter, and then it was mailed out for free to a mailing list, and then it got bigger and it turned into a subscription journal. And then there were a series of editors who took it. And, you know, in the early days, it was pre-internet. So all the knowledge of Sri Aurobindo and the mother occurred through physical transmission of some sort, you know, like books, magazines, person-to-person speaking. There was no internet, no email, no cell phone. So that's what, in the article I talk about, that's how it was for the first 20 or 30 years. And then, you know, things started to change with the internet and, you know, brings us up to today. So it's kind of a history of the development of collaboration and the changing times.
Right, and how these like as the times change, the kind of the ways in which culture is changing and growing and transforming, and the technology is changing, and collaboration in one way could be seen as a history of a shared aspirational community. You know, the collaboration being that trace, that physical thing that many different people and readers and authors and have kind of contributed to. So I think it's a beautiful thing. So we can look out for that in the new issue. But why don't we end here and just say thank you, Linda. Thank you, Marco. And it's been a fantastic spending time.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Linda.
guys.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you so
Have a
much.
nice
It's been a
time.
real honor, and it's wonderful to talk with you. So we'll see you soon, one way or another.
Till next time. Absolutely.
See
Okay.
you.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.